I want us to start on the sheet called data. Please confirm you are on the sheet called data. We have 3 sheets, the blue sheet, the red sheet, and the black sheet. We are going to start on the blue sheet called data. Now, just if you have forgotten what we did in the data management class we did last time, I intentionally put in column A to be having a small mismatch in the data format type. This for column A here has been recorded as date, but what I can clearly see in that column does not quite look like date. So then how do we convert this so that they can look as the typical dates that are known to us? So what you want to do at that point is you want to select the entire of column A by clicking on the header written A. That will select the entire of that column. Then proceed to, on your home tab, then there is a grouping called number. Just like last time I mentioned, whatever it is I'll be doing, I'll make sure I'm hovering my mouse around the item I'm doing. So let me just activate my spotlight. So what you will do, if you're not sure what I'm doing, then you will try follow my red spotlight to find where I am at. You can see the spotlight. Yes, please. So you will go to the numbers grouping, then click on that drop down. Click on that drop down and you shall choose short date. You shall choose short date. That will make your dates look like typical dates. Were you able to achieve that? Were we able to achieve that? Anyone? I'll appreciate your responses to just make sure we are moving together.
Yes, we're able.
All right, thank you. So then this column now looks like dates, and that was the only bit I wanted to just remind us from what we did last time. Now, to be able to proceed, I want us to do one quick trick to make our data summarization easy. I want us to table our data. Now, how a table data looks like, I want you to just refer to what we have in the black sheet called workbook. Just run to the black sheet called workbook, and you shall notice that there's a difference in how this data has been structured as opposed to what we have in the sheet called data and in the sheet called products details. So what we have in these 2 blue and red sheets are basic data that has been arranged in columns and rows as it is on Excel. But to be able to table this data, and I'll later on be able to illustrate the advantages of having your data in a table, much as that will be a repetition from last time, you want to use the shortcut Control-T. Control-T, T for table. So that will bring you some pop-up. Assuming you forget that shortcut, I'll want you to remember that you can go to the Insert tab with your cursor inside your data. You can go to the Insert tab. Then you shall click the 3rd item written table. You can see table. So you shall click on table, and the same pop-up that we had earlier on will pop up on your screen, upon which you shall just confirm one thing, that the checkbox my table has headers has been ticked. That basically means that the first row of your data will be treated as the headings of the respective column items. All right? So you shall proceed to say okay, and you will see that your data is restructured to look like what we had in the black sheet earlier on. That is good. Now, the moment you have your data inside a table, you're then given the task to be able to give it a name. Naming the table will allow you and assist you to be able to proceed into the later modeling stages of your data. Now, it's essential that you name it just in case you have to deal with more than one tables at a point in time. So at this point, I'm going to ask you to just, having clicked OK, you shall see up here written table name. If you're not able to locate it, then I want you to go up on your ribbon and locate table tools. Locate table tools. Are you able to see table tools? Then you shall see under table design. That is where you'll be able to see where you need to name your table. Is everybody able to locate that? Then I want you to go inside that box up there, and let's call this dataset. Dataset is one word. Just write in dataset and press enter. That will essentially have named this table for further use into the modeling stages of our processes. I want us to repeat the same thing with the second data set that is written product details. So click into the red sheet, product details, put your cursor anywhere inside that data that is there. We can use the shortcut Control-T, like I mentioned. The same pop-up comes on board. My checkbox is ticked, so I will click OK. Then I will proceed to also name this table. So go up in the table name area. Then let's call this product. Let's just call this product. Then press enter. It is the act of pressing enter that confirms the name that you have typed in for this table. Can somebody confirm to me that you've been able to name your two tables kindly? By voice or in the chat box? Collins is saying come again. I'm not sure which stage, but I'm going to assume it's at the point of having our data in table. So you put your cursor inside the table, you press Control T, T for table, then you click OK. Then you move up on the top leftmost location. You shall see table name. Please rename that the first one in data, call it data set. Then the one in the sheet called product details, please call it product. I can see 1, 2 yeses, so I shall assume and be able to proceed. Now let's go back to the sheet called data and let us start doing the work that brought us here, which is data summarization. Very quickly though, I can see that column A we have date, column B we have officer, column C we have product code, region, customer, unit sold, selling cost, etc. Why don't I give you a small task for you who is a continuous user of Excel? I want you to create for me a small report that gives me the regions versus the units that are sold in those regions. So I want you to create for me a unique list of regions, versus the units that are being sold in those respective regions. So what I mean is, I can see in the column these regions, we have CBD, we have Central, we have Hillside, Western, and the rest. So I want you to have the word CBD appearing once and get me the total of the units that were sold in the region called Central. And the same thing for the other regions as well. As you try to figure that out, I'm going to just explain to Josephat, who is asking that we explain what a table is I'm explaining the table as this component that allows us to be able to go into modeling. The table being a component in Excel that allows us to do modeling, and how it achieves that is it is able to compress the data set into one unique icon. And I'm going to maybe the best way to show this is when we move into the next stages. So I'm just going to ask that you put your data in a table, then we proceed. So to do that, we put our cursor inside the table, then we pressed Control T, and then we said, okay, that is how we are able to get our data as a table. Is that okay? I hope that helped. I hope that was able to help Josephat. Now, I had a small task. I was asking that we have a unique list of regions, then have, in comparison, the units sold in each of those regions. Janet, please help Nduta from the chat box. So for anybody who is struggling to achieve what I was asking, is I wanted you to be able to have the respective regions, and how best to achieve that is to be able to quickly populate the list of regions in a unique manner. How we achieve that is I want you to go to the data tab. Everybody to the data tab. Then in the region called sort and filter, my cursor is on that area. In sort and filter, you shall see this small filter button called advanced. Now, don't worry if yours is color black. I'm using Office 365. If you're using lower versions of Office, then most likely your two filter buttons are black. That is okay, they do the same thing. So click on the advanced filter button. Click on the advanced filter button. It will give you a pop-up that looks like mine. Then I want you to proceed in the list range. Delete whatever is in the list range and select the column for region. So just click on D up here so that the entire column is selected. So click on D up here so that the entire column is selected. I want you to skip criteria, but I want you to come up here and say you want to copy to another location. So basically, I don't want to filter this data in place. I want to filter it slightly by the side. So say copy to another location. Automatically, that opens up the copy to location. So put your cursor in copy to location. Then I want you to come and click inside our sheet, slightly on the side of our data. So you can select anywhere on column J. Are we there? Then I want you to remember to tick this box written unique records only. This will allow us to not repeat all these items, but only list one item at a time. So tick on the box unique records only, then say okay. And say okay. Please confirm that you're going to have a unique list of the regions. When I say unique, I mean no one region will be repeated more than once. Notice that in our data, I gave you a data set of 10,000 rows, exactly 10,000 rows of data, but this has been condensed into 7 rows, which is the various regions that we had. Now, importantly though, I want you to tell me how many units of each product were sold in each of these regions. So for CBD, for instance, I want you to add the 45 plus the 14 plus the 13 plus any other place where CBD appears all the way to the 10,000 rows. Then you repeat the same thing for central and hillsides. What is the easiest way to achieve that? John is indicating that they are lost on regions. So I'm going to just quickly undo and repeat that process. So John, follow with me. So what we've done is we went to the sheet called data. We are on the sheet called data. Then what we did is we went to the data tab. Now up in the ribbon, we have home, insert, page layout, and the rest. So we went to data. Then in the sort and filter location, we clicked on advanced. John, I hope you're following with me.
Yeah, I'm following.
Awesome, thank you. In the list range, that is where we choose the column for region. In the list range, that is where we choose the column for region. So delete whatever it is you may be having, then go and click on G. So we're clicking on the header for G, which essentially selects the entire of column G. Then you can see copy to is grayed out. This is because we have not enabled copy to another location. So click on copy to another location. Then under copy to, you shall now come and click anywhere on column J. So then copy to, you click anywhere on column J because that is going to be the location of which our data will be put in. Remember to check the box for unique records only. Then kindly press OK. Oh, sorry. I seem to have selected the wrong column. So I'm just going to have to redo that real quick. So what we did is we clicked inside the data, clicked on advanced. List range is column G. Oh, not column G, sorry, column D for region. Column D for region. List range is column D for region. Copy to, then under copy to location, you click anywhere on column J. Unique records only, then say OK. Do we have this list? Please remember to mute your laptops if you're not presenting. Thank you. Now, we have the unique list of items, but then how do we get to know the total of units sold in each of these regions? That is the task. So how we achieve that real quick is we can do this using a formula. Now, the intention of me showing you the formula is to show you how much complicated it will get if you do not know better tools. Then after using the formula, we are now going to introduce you to another tool which helps us with doing summarizations in split seconds. So let us quickly look at what the formula would look like to be able to achieve this. The formula we want to use here is called a sum if formula. So I'm just going to real quick proceed here to say units sold as the header. Then try put in a formula. My formula is a conditional sum function. Sum because I intend to add, and the if bit brings in the conditionality of the summation. So it's a sum if function. So I shall proceed to say equals sum if. Then you need to tab or to double click on the sum if formula. our range, because we would wish to add something for the regions, our range will be the column that contains all the regions. That is column D. So I shall proceed to click on D. So you click on the area written D, that selects the entire column. Put a comma. I hope we are together. The criteria is now, Excel is now asking, in the column that you selected, which is region, what units do you want me to give? The units of which region specifically at this moment? Because I'm writing the formula on the right of CBD, I'm going to just come and click on the CBD that I can see right on my side here. So I'll click on this CBD, comma. Then lastly, what is the sum range? What exactly did we want to add? We wanted the units sold. So I shall come and select on column F, which is units sold, and press enter. And just like that, we have the total number of units that were sold in the CBD for the various products that we have. You can double click on this icon down here. You can double click on this icon down here. And in a minute, we have the list of all items that were sold in the CBD, or in the regions rather. Did anybody achieve this? Was anybody able to achieve this with me?
Yes.
Good. I can see 1 or 2 people were able to achieve that. But what if I told you there was an easier way of achieving this rather than going through the formula and filtering? What if another way could get us here faster? That is what we are presenting you today. Welcome to pivot tables. So to be able to achieve this result that we have here, I could have done this in less than a second by using this tool we call pivot table. And how well do we use pivot tables? Put your cursor inside this data. Now, not inside the one we've created, inside the table that we have. Put your cursor inside our table. Put your cursor inside our table, anywhere. Go to the Insert tab. Then the very first item you shall meet is called pivot table. Click on pivot table. Click on pivot table. I'm going to avoid explaining all the items that are on this pop-up, but I want you to trust me and click OK. We shall use the other features in the next steps. So click OK for now. When you click OK, what you meet here is called a pivot table field. This is where we are now expected to map in our fields. To just quickly bring to your attention, the various columns that we had in the data we had clicked on are seen mapped down here on the right, if anybody can see them. The various data columns that we had are the ones you are able to see up here, starting from date, officer, all the way to selling cost. What summary did you create using the formula? It was a summary of region versus unit sold. The pivot table makes it easy. Instead of writing formulas, you will just need to come to this list pane here, click on region. Automatically, you see sort of the list we had the other time when we used the advanced filter. Then come and click unit sold. And in 1 second, we already have the same data that I created using a formula. Now, I know somebody is probably imagining that this might not be the same thing we had. So I just want us to go back to the data tab. Go back to the sheet we had for data. Select our results, both the filtered column and the column that we had using the formula. Control C. Can anybody tell us what Control C does? Any reminder? Control C copies your data. So select this area, Control C to copy. Come to sheet 1, the one we've created. I want you to put your cursor just a step away from what we had in the pivot. But don't just normally paste, because remember, the data we are copying has some formulas. So I want you to right click here. And then under the paste options, I want you to click the second one, which is values. Then now we are able to compare the result we had using the formula and the result that the pivot table has given us. The only difference is this one has been sorted in from A to Z. Yes, has been sorted from A to Z, which we can also do on this side. We can just select this area, and under the sort area, under sort and filter, we can just say we want to sort A to Z, then we shall definitely have the same results. Confirm. So you notice that now we have the same results arrived at in two different processes, one very easy and one having taken quite some time. All depends on what you imagine is easy for you. Was anybody able to get this far?
Yes, we are together.
We're together. Awesome. So this is how easy pivot tables work. So what you need to do is anytime you want to create a pivot table, always remember to go back to the original data. Make sure your cursor is inside the data. If you tried inserting a pivot table, if your cursor is out here, notice where my cursor is at currently, outside the data, it will only try to map whatever it is that is out there. So always make sure before you insert a pivot table, your cursor is inside the original data you'd wish to use for mapping. So your cursor is inside there, then you proceed to the Insert tab, then you click on Pivot Table. Are we together? You click on Pivot Table. Now, this second time, I want us to insert a pivot table, but not on a new sheet. Notice that the first time we inserted a pivot table, Excel opened a new sheet, currently labeled Sheet 1, and put our pivot table there. I want us to quickly rename Sheet 1 to something else. So let us call it Units Analysis. Let's call it Units Analysis. Units Analysis. I hope you still remember how to rename your sheets. If you have forgotten, you come to the sheet name, you right click, you shall see rename somewhere in the third icon. Alternatively, you double click on the sheet name that exists and you immediately start typing the good name that you want to have that sheet to have. Are we together? So this time, I want us to insert a pivot table. Now we are no longer going to use the formula. I want us to use the pivot table because we have clearly shown that is an easier way to go about it. I want us to quickly insert a pivot table, but now not on a new sheet, but on this sheet that we already have, so that we can do some cross-referencing. How do we achieve that? Go back to data. That's the first process of inserting a pivot table. So go back to your original data. Put your cursor at point on pivot table. Point on pivot table. Over there. Now, instead of clicking OK, notice that by default settings, this always takes us to a new sheet. Now, I want us to change this to an existing sheet so that we are able to direct this pivot table to a sheet that we already have. So change it from new worksheet to existing worksheet. Put your cursor in the location, the space for location. Then just scroll all the way to the sheet names and click on the new sheet we just renamed called Unit Analysis. So click on Unit Analysis. You shall see the word Unit Analysis appear in the Location tab. Then go further, and in the Unit Analysis sheet that is currently open, click on some space just below the first pivot we created. Then say OK. What will happen is Excel is going to open another pivot table field for you to be able to create another summary. This time, I want us to do a unit analysis, not based on regions as the first one, but now based on the customer. Now based on the customer. Do we have a question? So what we're going to do here is, having created the pivot field, I want us this time to choose a customer. So just proceed by clicking inside the customer box. Clicking inside the customer box, then you also tick inside the units sold. You also tick inside the units sold. Then in 1 second, as you can confirm, we now have the list of customers here versus the units that each customer bought in the duration of my data set. In the duration of my data set. Now, let us take a minute to just look at what data we have in our pivots and the interpretation of it. Now, I want us to quickly rename some of these headers. So I want us to start with the first pivot that we have up here. I can see it's written row labels. It is good practice to always have your report useful, and how better to make it useful than having it with the relevant names. So much so that when you send it to the user, they do not necessarily need to call you and ask you, hey, but these row labels, what exactly were you putting up here? It makes more sense if you just give up the names so that it makes it easy to use your data. So what I want to proceed to do here is I want to click on row labels, the first one. And because these are regions, it will make sense to just come and say that these are regions rather than leave the word row labels. How you do that is you just click on the row labels and you start typing in the name. So this was a regional analysis for units. So I'm just writing here regions. The other thing I want to do is down here, because this was an analysis of customer versus units, I just want to come inside the row labels and type in the word customers, and that has been changed. Now, this makes more sense, having this report saying these are regional. This is a summary of regions versus units, and this is a summary of customers versus units. It makes more sense for the person who may be using this data or this report later on in time to be able to achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve. Do I have people who are able to get this far with me? Okay, so why don't I give you one small task then? I want you to go back to the data sheet, create for me one quick pivot by yourselves. I won't be doing this. I'll be waiting until one or two people inform me that they have. Create for me a pivot for officer versus the cost. I want to know the cost that each officer incurs in making a sale. Now you can see we have the column for selling costs and we have a column for officer. I want you to create this pivot in a new sheet, not on the existing sheet. I want you to have this report on a new sheet. The report should be about the list of officers versus the cost they spend in making their sales. We want to be able to tell which officer perhaps is the most expensive or incurs the most in being able to make a sale. So we are able to even monitor our margins, because that will be essential in any business that is serious about what they do as a business. So you have a minute to do that before I finally do mine. In case you're feeling stuck or in case you joined us late, then you can see what I'm doing. So we say that to be able to insert that pivot table, you shall start from the data. You go to insert, you click on pivot table. Then because we want it on a new worksheet, you shall leave it at that, then click OK. Because this gentleman asked for the list of officers, you shall just quickly come and tick inside the officers box. And then because I was interested in the selling cost, you shall tick inside that. And that is done. That is how easy pivot table gets. That is how easy pivot table gets. So I shall just come under row labels and say this is the list of officers. So I shall write officers. Then we can now be able to tell our boss that, you know, this officer called William incurs the most, a total of 193,000, while this officer called Peter incurs just about 186. Not so much difference, but at least relatively, there's a difference. Now, that is introduction to pivot tables. But there is so much that a pivot table can allow you to achieve. Now, let us try and look at some of those items that a pivot table can help you achieve. Let us start on the sheet that we are on. So I want you to just rename this sheet. Remember, we said the essence of a report is being able to make other users comfortably navigate around. So I want to rename this sheet officer's cost, so that if we send this sheet to somebody out there, they won't need to scroll through to see what is inside. They'll be able to tell just by looking at the cover that in this sheet, I'm expecting the costing per officer, the selling cost per officer, something of that kind. So just give a name that you imagine would help the person reading a report to be able to quickly navigate through. You have noticed that in all my pivot tables, I am putting the comma separators in the figures. Comma separators are, you know, these 1,000 separators to just make sure that it's easy to read. I don't confuse it for 19,000 when it's 191,000, or I don't confuse it for 19 million.
Next week.
Somebody saying something? Not to us at least, right? Okay, we shall proceed. So can we please confirm so far we are okay? Anybody who is getting stuck at the very basics of pivot tables? Because we now want to change gear slightly and dive a little deeper into pivoting. This far we good? I'll assume so. Now, I want you to notice some items here even as progress. For number one, that this pivot table has 4 areas. We have the filters, the columns, the rows, and the values. The values are basically the items that are used to give greater detail to whatever exists in the rows. Currently, we have officers in the rows, which is the items you can see lined up here: Jane, Joseph, Mary, Peters, and Williams. But what are their details with regards to selling cost? Jane incurs 191,000. Now that is the value for Jane. We have 2 other panes that we have not used yet, columns and filters. We're going to use that in a short while. But this is not the only thing we can do. Currently, this pivot table gives us the total, notice the word sum, the total of selling cost per officer. We can decide to change this from the total to, let's say, the number of times Jane makes a sale and incurs a selling cost. The number of times Joseph makes a sale and incurs a selling cost. We can change it to the average, the number of times, or averagely how much cost Jane incurs. We can change it to the maximum cost that Jane had, to the minimum cost that Jane has. That all depends on what report you're interested to give. So let me just quickly show you how to change that. Assuming we did not want the total of selling cost, which is the sum, assuming we wanted the number, which is called count on Excel, the quickest way, and because of time I would show the others, you just come on the word sum of selling cost and you double click. Kindly double click on the word sum of selling cost. When you double click, this pop-up comes on board. And in this drop-down list here, you can see sum, count, average, and almost everything I was talking about earlier. So when you click on count and say okay, this will now give us the total number of times that Jane had a selling cost to their name. Notice I said when we were starting that I gave you a data set of a total of 10,000 rows of data. And you can see my total is 10,000 here because these are all the officers we have, which means the number of times each officer interacted with our data should bring a total of 10,000. Which means the interpretation here would be that William sold or had selling costs 2,029 times, while Mary had only 1997 total number of sales. We might even want to decide to compare the number of times they made a sale versus the cost that is associated with them to be able to tell what the average is. That will be your choice. We can decide to change this from count to, let's say, average. And how to do that, just like we said, you double click on this name, then you can change this to average. Now, the average will be telling us roughly what's the middle point of this person's cost. When you compare all the costs that they incur across the data, what is the average? So when you click on average, that is what it gets us. So Jane sales averages 95 for costs, 92 all the way going down like that. So it's upon you to decide what exactly you'd wish to use in your report. For this case, I'm going to just change it back to sum and leave it at that. So that is one way. Number two, the other thing you need to notice with a pivot table is that all these figures are special. For starters, you cannot come inside a pivot table and start changing figures. That pop-up you can see there is because I was trying to type in something. You can confirm that on your end as well. You cannot come inside a pivot table and start changing anything. All right? So when you try to change anything, you will notice that your pivot table will leave you hanged out there until you are able to adjust that back. So you cannot change anything inside a pivot table. The other thing you need to notice with a pivot table is that these numbers, they are special in that you can use them to drill down. Drilling down is basically asking yourself, assuming that I was interested in this 193,000 for William, I was asking myself, how is it that William's selling cost is this high? What could have contributed to this amount of selling cost? What I need to do is just double click on this figure and I shall be able to see the full details of what contributes to this 193,000. So just double click on that figure and automatically Excel will create a new sheet And in that new sheet, it will be giving you the specific details for only William. Notice the officer column is only speaking about William. Also notice that the selling cost will total the amount you clicked on earlier. When you look at the data statistics, summary statistics down on your Excel, you'll notice that the figures are exactly what we clicked on earlier on. Somebody was able to follow through with that with me? Was that okay?
Yes. Yes.
Good. Thank you, John. Now, I want to refer you back to a pivot we have just created a few minutes ago to be able to do some more modifications. But before we do that, I want you to click on this sheet 3, the result of what we clicked just a second ago. I want you to rename that to drill down. Drill down, that is the name of the process. When you double click any figure in a pivot table, that result is called a drill down report. Basically, you've been able to ask yourself, what is the combination or what are the specific details that are helped us arrive at this figure that we were looking at? That's called a drill down report. So at that point, I'm going to refer you to a sheet we created earlier to be able to do some little more advancements to just illustrate a point further. Let us go back to the sheet we called units analysis. Let us refer back to the sheet we called units analysis. Now we are slowly tightening the nuts on what we already know. Are we all there? Now notice that in these two pivot tables we have, one of them is doing the regional summary for units sold. The other pivot table is doing a customer summary for units sold. What if we wanted to look at these two summaries in one report? What if I did not want these two reports? I only wanted one pivot table that gives me the total of those two summaries. What would I have done? So to show you what I would have done, I want you to go back now to the sheet called data. Go back to the sheet called data. Then insert a blank pivot table, but that pivot table, I want it to come in the sheet called unit analysis. So we start from data, put your cursor inside our table, go up into the insert tab, click pivot table. I'm just saying that slowly so that you remember in case you're forgetting. Then in this pop-up, don't click OK because I do not want it in a new worksheet. I want it in an existing worksheet because I want you to see the difference if I combine those two pivots in one. Having clicked existing, click location, put your cursor inside location. Now it's at that point where you go back to unit analysis. Unit analysis. Then this time, I want you to put this pivot just by the side. Notice where I'm putting my cursor. Just put the pivot slightly by the side of this other data that we have. And then click OK. All right. So I want to start by creating this pivot the way we created it. The first one here, the one for regions versus units sold. And if I remember how we did that is we just came on the pivot down here. So click on the pivot down here, the one we just created. Click on regions and click on units sold. And in 1 second, we already have a similar pivot with this one here. But that is not what I wanted. I want us to be able to combine this pivot and this pivot in one. I want to be able to see them side by side. That is very possible on Excel. And how we achieve that is we combine them by using the columns field list that we had not used before. Notice that to this moment, we've only been using rows and values. So what we're going to do in that instance, I want you to click on customer. You can see customer and put a tick inside customer. But make sure while changing that, your cursor is inside the pivot table we inserted the latest. Make sure your cursor is inside the pivot table we inserted the latest. So click inside customer. Click inside customer. Then this report here is generated. This report here is generated. So now for CBD, they're giving us the list of customers and their units in the CBD. Notice that the total for CBD is the same as the total we had for CBD up here. But now it has been further broken down into the various customers and how the units they consume in each of the stores in the CBD. The same thing happens for Central, and it becomes a long list going down. All right, it becomes a long list going down. But what if we can change the alignment of this table such that instead of having it as a long list running down like that, we instead move the customer from rows and put it in columns. So see what I'm doing? So I've gone to the rows labels down here. I'm going to put my cursor on the word customer. I will left click and hold. Then I will drag it. I will just move my cursor as I move towards customer, it shall move there. Alternatively, I can come and pick customer from up here, but this time not click inside the box. Then left click and hold, drag and bring it in columns. The moment I drop this customer here, the customer that is under rows will automatically move, because you cannot have one item under columns and rows at the same time. So I will drop it there and see the difference now in the table. Instead of having it as a long table running down, we now have it as a short and stout table that really gives us everything that we were looking for. So notice that we still have the regions, which is basically what we had here. The totals for the regions are still here on the very far side. Then additionally, we now have we now have the customers, only that they're now not arranged in rows like they were here. They're now arranged in columns. And then the totals, these ones down here, are now arranged but across. So basically, when I pick a figure like this one, this basically gives us the units sold in central region for the customer called Milimani. Another figure there. So you now this now cross-sectional analysis. So this now the number of units sold in the area called Marshland for the customer called One Way. And that is how now we are able to interpret this data going forward. Of course, I'll proceed to again rename the areas. So the row labels, I'll just be kind enough to call it region. And the column labels, I will proceed to call it customer. And my table now makes a little bit more sense in being able to help me with the summarizations I might want to be having. Do we have any question up at that moment? Do we have any questions up at that moment? No questions? Okay. So then, good, no questions this moment. Now, let us try and change gears further. What we've dealt with so far are basic pivot tables. Let me stress you 1 second. I want you to create for me a new pivot table in a new sheet that gives me the units sold, listen, per product. Go back to our data, go back to the sheet called data. I want you to create for me a pivot table that gives me the units sold, not per region, not per officer, not per customer, but per product. Run through that real quick. Tell me if you find it challenging. So now we are slowly tightening the nuts on what we are learning. We don't have much time, so responses that come earlier will be appreciated. So I'm looking for a pivot table that gives me the summary of units sold per product. Per product. I did not say product name. I do not say product code rather. I need the product names. I need the product names. Maybe to help you, because I can imagine somebody is already wondering, you might need to refer to the red sheet. You might need to refer to the red sheet. So going to the red sheet, you notice that is the only location where we have products, the names of the products. But in all other data sets, we do not have product names. Now reminds me, we had changed this data into a table for you guys. I think I undid when I was trying to explain to somebody how to go about it. So I'm just going to proceed to convert it into a table. And if I remember, the name we gave it was product. So I'm just write product and press enter. Do we have anybody who has been able to get me the pivot table I'm looking for? A pivot table that gives me the list of product names versus the units sold. Anyone? Now, I can tell you for free that as the data sits right now, that is not possible. Why so? Because you will proceed to come inside the data. Now, I'm on the blue sheet. You'll proceed to go inside the data, click insert, click pivot table, and say OK. Now, in the list that you're going to have down here, you will be able to locate the units sold, but you will not be able to see the product names anywhere. You are not able to see the product names anywhere. So then there is a need to find a way of linking the blue sheet with the red sheet so that the product names can be found. Okay. So when you are working with data that sits on multiple areas, multiple locations, multiple sheets, multiple workbooks, there is a need to create what we call relationships so that those two tables are able to work side by side by themselves. All right. So then how do we achieve that? You're going to need to define that small relationship there. And how we achieve that is, I want you to, while inside data, go back to data, put your cursor inside the table. Then I want you to click the data tab now. Up in the ribbon, there's home, insert, page layout. I want you to click the data tab. Are we there? Then in the data tab, I want you to locate the data tools. My cursor is hovering around data tools. If you're finding trouble getting it, data tools. Somebody can find data tools? Then in data tools, I want you to click on relationships. See where my cursor is at? This item here is called relationships. So click on relationships. So click on that. What we're going to do is we are going to try and create some small relationship between those two sheets to be able to make Excel be able to navigate. Now, while you're wondering what relationship you're going to create, I want you to notice that the blue sheet has this column called product code. And the product details has this column called product code. And basically they're the same numbers. So it's like going to the supermarket, and instead of the cashier typing that you're buying super loaf bread, they simply scan the code that is on that bread, and in the background, your receipt comes out reading super loaf bread. Okay, so it's because that code has been linked to that product you're purchasing. So then that is what we want to do here, so that going forward, if I call this name BC006, which basically stands for data claim 006, Excel will be able to know that I'm referring to a product called paper. Then I will now be able to map this paper versus the unit sold, which sits in this other sheet called data. All right. So how do we create that relationship? Again, I said you put your cursor anywhere, in either in this table called data or in this other table called product. Click on relationship. Relationship, you shall find it in the data tab. Then in the data tools, then you shall see relationships. So I hope you've now been able to locate it. Then what you'll proceed to do from there is you will click new up there. Then we need to now call the names of those two tables. Now, this is where you start to notice that it was very essential that we name our tables. So click on this drop down, the first one. Then you shall see the names of the various tables that we have. But because we named them well, I want you to click on the one that is written worksheet table dataset. So click on worksheet table dataset. Then in the related table, click on the other one that is written worksheet table product. Click on those two. So the first one is worksheet table dataset. Now, I'm assuming at that point that you renamed them dataset and product respectively. Then under the column, you come and click on the product code for all of them. You come and click on product code for all of them. What that is going to do is it's going to connect this code that sits in the products details with the code that sits in the other column so that Excel is able to know that there is some relationship among those two. We shall proceed to click OK, and Excel will be able to authenticate and create that relationship. If it is found that there's a relationship, then we shall be able to have it here. Now, the relationships created can only be one to many or many to one. The relationship cannot be many to many. Now, I probably know that might sound like Greek, but basically what I mean is this DC001, you must have one list that is unique. So in my case, this is the one list, so that in this column, you cannot have any other DC001. While when you go to the other sheet called data, you shall find another DC, you shall find more than one DC001. So in my case, I'm linking many to one. Since the first column has many codes that are similar, but the second list has only unique codes. No code is repeated. That is what I mean by many to one or one to many. But anyway, no worries about it. As long as you have that unique listing, that would work. So it tells us that the status, this has been activated, which means the relationship has been created this far. So we shall proceed to say close. We shall proceed to say close. Then now, if I wanted you to create, remember the pivot table I was asking you, which was you to create a pivot table that is giving us a list of products versus the units sold. Notice that the product sits in the red sheet, unit sold is in the blue sheet. But because of that relationship we have created, we are going to be able to map it very easily. We proceed. We have sheet 4, the sheet you had just created, and realize we didn't have product appearing here. So what you're going to do going forward, if you other versions of Excel, if you go to insert, there will be a drop down just below pivot table. But don't worry if you can't see the drop down. You will just come down here, scroll to the scroll way below. Then you shall see the word more tables just after the entire listing of columns. Click on more tables. Then this pop-up here is basically telling you we need to ensure that we have relationships, which is basically what we've done. So just say yes. There is going to be a small difference. While initially your pivot table was showing the unique columns, it is now showing them as tables. Okay. Notice that there's a table we created that was called dataset. I can see it here. Notice there's another table we created that was called product. It is right here. Don't worry about data and prod. Those are previous samples from what I was doing just before we started the webinar. So don't worry about those. So because we know that the product listing, the product names are in the table called product, you will click on this small arrow on product. Then you shall see we have 3 columns, which is product code, product, and unit price. Go and click on product. Automatically, we shall have a list of all our products. Then we wanted a pivot table that gives us the name of products versus the units sold, not unit price. Now, unit sold is not in this table. Unit sold is in this other table called dataset. So we shall click on dataset and try locate unit sold. I just found it, and you click on it. In split seconds, we already have a pivot table that is now reading from 2 different data tables seated in 2 different Excel worksheets. And there we go. We now have a listing of the units sold for each of the products that we have in our branch or in our store as they were sold. So this gets us this good list that we have here, which we can proceed to rename. So why don't you rename this sheet 5 to products, and then row labels up here, we shall call that product as well. And that is the list we have. That is the list we have. That's good so far. Were we able to achieve creating a pivot table from 2 different sheets?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. Now, the other thing we are able to achieve, and I'm assuming now this is a very big store that does that sells so many products. You probably want to create a report in categorizations. For instance, you want to tell people, bread and milk and what here we have chocolate, cola, that those are foodstuffs. Then you want to tell people that, you know, stuff like chairs and desks and what? Yeah, chairs and desks, those are furniture. Then you probably, so you want to sort of segregate your data into components to help in your reporting. You can be able to achieve that by clicking the relevant item. So for instance, I want to click on bread, then I will press my control button, press and hold control, then I will go and click on chocolate and click on cola, anything that looks like food stuff, right? What other food stuff do we have? Milk. You can see milk here. Now, when you're clicking, be very careful. When you put your cursor so close to the left pane, it will show an arrow pointing forward. When you click where the arrow is pointing forward, it will select even the values column. So when you want to select only the one item, you click somewhat towards the center. So you click on bread, then we said chocolate, and we said cola, and we said fruits, and probably milk. Now, in our store, these items should appear, we want to group them and call all these items foodstuffs, so that when somebody is looking at a wider category, how much do we spend on foodstuff, rather than how much do I spend on bread and milk, then you can be able to provide that categorization. So having clicked all of them, you shall right click and say group. Okay, I can see that we're not able to group that category. Let's see again. Okay, 1 second on that. So the categorize, okay, 1 second. We are not able to group this category because we are creating this pivot table from 2 different sheets. Because we are creating the pivot table from 2 separate sheets. If we were doing this on data that has been arrived at from 1 sheet, then that becomes easy. And I'm just illustrating that, doing it from a separate sheet. So just go back to officers. We have the list for officers cost. You can see when I try to categorize, let's say Jane and John, and I want to group them, then I'm able to group them because these were arrived at from only 1 sheet of data. So there's some limitations when you are working with data across multiple sheets, and one of those limitations is you are not able to group them, and you're also not able to insert formulas across your data. But at least we are able to cross-compare data that sits on numerous sheets at the same time. All right, good. Why don't I ask us to create one more using the same formula we've used? Why don't we create one more pivot table and see how best it takes us? I want you to create for me a summary of time, which is basically, here we're calling it date. I want you to create for me a summary of time versus profits. A summary of time versus profit. So basically, I want to know in January, in February, all the way, depending on the month that are captured, how much profit were we making in each of those items? Or let's call it revenue. Let's make it easy first. Let's call it revenue. Now, if you can look at our data, you're going to realize that we do not have a revenues column. We do not have a revenues column. So then how do we achieve that? We might need to create a calculated column. We might need to have a calculated column. But since calculated columns cannot be made by cross-referencing, revenue will basically be the units sold versus the unit price, right? The number of units sold per item versus the unit price. Now, those sit in two different areas. So why don't we go to one of the sheets we already created? And I want you to go to, we had a sheet called units analysis. Yes, go to units analysis. Go to units analysis. Units analysis. On units analysis, I want us to create a column that is not arrived at by clicking, but rather by calculating a column. So because in our data here, I can see we have the selling cost and the units sold. I want us now to know the total cost, the total selling cost. Notice that the selling cost that I have here is per unit. Now, if I want to know the total selling cost, I would need to be multiplying the selling cost times the units sold of that in that region. So what we can do is click on the first pivot we had earlier on. You can see it. Let me just activate my pointer yet again. Right. So I'm on this pivot here. The first one, the one that gave us the summary of regions versus units sold. So I'll click inside. But now instead of clicking anything here to drag or drop, I will go to pivot table analyze. Other people will only have it as analyze. It's one of the very far right icons on your ribbon. I hope you found it. Then I will want you to locate the calculations tab. My cursor is on it, if you can see it. The calculations tab. Then I will want you to choose the first one, which is fields, items, and sets. Click on that one. Fields, items, and sets. Then click on the very first one, which is calculated field. So the calculated field allows us to be able to insert a quick column that is as a result of every other thing that we have. So this calculated field, I want us to call it total cost. So we just change the name up there, total cost. Then our formula, because we want the total cost, and the total cost is basically the number of units sold times the selling cost. So you will come here, instead of now typing, you come and double click on the units sold. When you double click, it will be put inside the formula with those single quotes. Put a multiplication sign. Remember that on Excel, we multiply using the asterisk or the star, as many people call it. Then times the selling cost. You also double click. Again, they will have the name in those single quotes. When you say add, that column will be added in our data. Then we'll proceed to say, okay. And in 1 second, we now have a column that is a result of the calculation of the product of the units sold times the selling cost per item. That is how we are able to get calculated columns while using pivot tables. Now, one last thing as we finish here, we are able to control these pivot tables, or we are able to incorporate other aspects of our data into the pivot tables by using some items we call slicers. So that is the last thing I want us to do. Then we can spare the next 7 minutes for question and answer as we finish this webinar today. So put your cursor inside the pivot table that results. So put your cursor inside that pivot table. Then very quickly, go to the pivot table analyze. Pivot table analyze. Then I want you to first click insert timeline. Click insert timeline. Then click inside the date and say, okay. Click inside the date and say, okay. You shall see, this nice item here that has the date components. You see it spans for all the years and the months like that. All right. Now this item, when you click on a month, say January, you're going to notice that this pivot table is going to change to only reflect the figures for January or February, any other month that we select for that purpose. If you want to select more than 1 month, let's say I want to select Q1, which is January, February, and March, you just left click, hold, and drag over January, February, and March. Then the resulting result will be for the area you have highlighted. If you wanted, say January through December, then you just proceed the same thing and you have the result as such. If you don't want to see the months, you can just click on this drop down here and say you only want to see the years only. You don't want to see the months. Then it shall result in this smaller timeline that only gives us the years and not the months, like that. So that we are now able to just decide we want to see 2020 or 2021, depending on what it is we want to achieve. Now, that is one. The second thing, we can also insert slicers. So again, click inside this pivot table. Click inside the pivot table. Then go to pivot table analyze. Then this time, instead of timeline, I want you to click on slicer. I want you to click on slicer. Then this time, I want you to choose officer and region customer. Yeah, let's choose region and officer. Let's choose region and officer, or rather, let's choose officer and product code. Officer and product code. Then say okay. Shall get us to these two slicers here. So we have the first slicer, which is the names of the officers. The other slicers is the product codes. Because the product code is a bit long, it has, I think, 16 items. I will try to maybe make it appear in 4 rows like that. So what I did is I came to the columns and increased the number of columns so that they appear in 4 columns rather than appearing in one large column. Then I have this list now. Notice that when I come and click on any product code, this data is again filtered for only that product now. You notice? So anything you click on, the data changes to basically give you a filter of the area you have highlighted. So with the use of this timeline and these slicers, we are able now to filter further our data and ask ourselves, what was the performance of, say, Joseph Amani in this regional report for units? And what about for Peters and for every other person you might want to be reporting to? And as we finish, I want to imagine somebody is interested in by asking, what if I wanted to see the performance of Jane, but in all these 3 slices that I'm in all these 3 pivots that I'm having here? How is it that when I click on 2021, it's only this pivot that changes and not these 2? What if we can make all of them change by that one move? And that is very much possible. So what you will need to do is to just connect these 3 tools here. These 2 are called slicers. This one is called a timeline. Connect the 3, and how you connect them is you will put your cursor on the first icon up here, the timeline. Put your cursor on the space up here, right click. Then somewhere down there, you shall see report connections. You'll see report connections. So just go without explaining, just check all the boxes you can see. Make sure every box is checked. Make sure every box is checked, then say okay. Proceed to do the same thing with the product code. Right click on the white space, report connections, check all the boxes that we're having. Say okay, and repeat the same thing for the last one. Right click, report connections, and check all the boxes that you have. Then say okay. Now, having done that, if you came and clicked on, say, year 2020 here, all these 3 pivot tables are going to change. Why don't we confirm? So when I click on 2020, notice that all of them changed. Click on 2021, all of them are changing. So when I unfilter, I click on product code 1, same as product code 6, or any other product that I want to click for that reason, all the items are changing like that. So now, instead of going back to the data, I'm able to control what I'm seeing in my reports here, in the various pivot tables I've created. I'm able to control them using these small buttons I've created, which are called slicers. And this one is called a timeline because it represents the time component in the pivot table. It represents the time component in our pivot table, that hence the name timeline. So other than having to rush us through, I've been able to quickly highlight the various uses in which pivot tables can be used to be able to do our reporting. And I would think I would wish to stop there for questions and answers for those who are maybe perhaps lost or something before we end. We intend to finish at exactly 5 as we indicated. So allow me to stop at that moment and welcome any questions, answers, or concerns. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm open to any comments that come in.
Hi, Jason.
Yes, sir.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
My name is Gidenji. I think I missed the part where on the product code slicer, you see initially we had a very long list, and then you condensed it to sort of so how do you...
Good question. So click on that product, click on the slicer for product code. Now, if you don't want to select any of the items, you click on the white space just above it. Then up in your ribbon, you will see the slicer tools. It's the very far right. You'll either see slicer or slicer tools. Then when you click on slicer tools under buttons, you will see columns. If you can't see it, just follow my red pointer. So slicer, then columns. So you increase the columns. The more you increase the columns, the more they are. So I put it at 4 because I noticed there are 16 items. So I made them 4 columns. So it made it a 4x4 shading like that. Does that help you, Gidenje?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. Any other question? Concerns? Not to worry. I know we sort of moved fast and tried to cover a lot. So this session has been recorded, and in a few days you'll be able to receive the link to be able to watch the video. Also, it will be posted on our official YouTube channel at some point. So feel free to go there. In case you missed the first session on data management, that has since been posted on our YouTube channel, which my colleague Fred or Janet can proceed to post in the comment box for your use. Allow me to stop at that point and welcome my colleagues for just a few words before we wrap up this session for today. Thank you so much.